Start the math.
Excellent. That's good. Chuck it.
Well, the first like 5 of them, it's just finding the right. So it's just plug and shove. So like that's the driving part.
How's it going?
Dr. Chair.
You can call me whatever you want.
Oh, sorry, I've never met you.
Oh, yeah. I'm Justin, Dr. Trent, whatever.
Yes, nice to meet you. So you teach biomechanics, right?
Yes. Yeah.
How often is that taught? Because I wanted to join, but I have fluids at the same time.
So usually for those 400 level technical electives, they're offered once a year.
Once a month.
And so I typically teach this one in the fall, and then I have another class in the spring called 442. And so that's more focused on like cardiovascular, like blood flow.
Blood flow?
Yeah, blood flow biomechanics.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Do you have the office or anything? I
Yeah.
wouldn't have office hours.
My office is 2 floors up here, so that's CS 526. But I only have in-person office hours on Thursday.
On Thursday?
And so Monday, Wednesday, they are online. And so I have a Zoom link. And so if you do you have my email address?
Yeah, I think I can search up to the.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you send me an email, then I can give you the Zoom link for office hours. So my next one is going to be tomorrow at 4 o'clock.
What about Thursday in person?
Thursday in person is 9 a.m.
9 a.m. Okay. All right. Nice.
Yeah. And what was your name?
Luis.
Luis?
Nice
Cool.
to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to see you, John? Well done, CH5. So the only thing I didn't know. There's a this one, and there's 3 zeros. That's D squared and E. So I don't know if I have this or not. So and then I think the second one is E cubed, which would have 0, 0, 0. I think, but I don't. That's oh no,
I tried. I just saw that.
just tells you to. What it is in that makes it harder. Sure, you take them. You take them. So use that. Nice. It's not too hard. It's really, really like high level.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Do I happen to join your wait list for 10?
I have no idea because I know that there were 13 people on the wait list on Friday, 14 people. And so what I asked the department to do was I asked them to add 14 seats to that one.
Gotcha.
And then I assumed that those 14 people made it in the class, but I didn't check who was on the wait list at the time. I only saw just the number that was there.
Gotcha. Because I tried to join, but said I hopped on the wait list. I'm not sure, but I joined one yesterday. Like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I don't know if the 14th person got it or not, but I hopped on the wait list and I mean, I'm not sure. I actually want to get your opinion. Do you think it'd be a good idea to switch this out for that? When I graduate, I think it's manufacturing. I know FDA, I think health.
I see. Well, I mean, FEA is definitely more related to manufacturing than this classes. But that class is at 49 people already. And so I really don't want to add any more seats to that class. That's already kind of that's already kind of past my limit. But
Gotcha.
so I basically saw who was there on the wait list on Friday and I just let in as many people as I could.
I see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So no one. Yeah, I don't plan on taking any more students at 410.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, that's all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
It's kind of related to 410. Is there a way where I can download actually like older versions of ANSYS? Because on the website, it doesn't let me. It only lets me download the 2022 version.
I'm not sure actually. If you search it, you might be able to. But the most recent version should work for. Is there a specific feature you're looking for?
No, because so on the computers are the 2021 version.
Oh,
and I
okay.
was working on it, and
Yeah.
then like when I plugged it in from into my own desktop at home,
It's
it's
a version.
2022, and then
Yeah.
it automatically converted that file. So I was like, and then I'm trying to work on here, and I'm like, dang.
Oh, but I see.
Yeah, so I was wondering if there's a way to like install the older one.
I'm sure there is. And you probably have to search it. So like you can
Okay,
search
so
up this
probably
thing.
search it.
ANSYS, I think this one's like 2021 R1.
Yeah.
So if you just search that ANSYS 2021 R1 student, then you might be able to find. They might have it archived somewhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll look for that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So what does it like cancel out before that? So I mean, let's say he buys 20 transactions, $1 each.
Maybe it's $100.
That's $40, but they said $500 for doing the first 20 transactions.
Yep. Yeah.
Bro, I'm telling you, they've been, honestly, they've been keeping on top of that, the goal is higher. Yeah.
Hey, so- No, we're doing just doing a straight. So the activities are just usually a one-day thing, and then whatever you don't finish, you work.
you alone, okay? It's my culture. I don't school in the back, watch your kids and show up, like, oh, great, what's up, guys? Oh, really?
Okay, it's 4 o'clock, so let's go and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good, good. Everyone, thumbs up, smiling faces. It's week 2. Everyone's still happy, so we'll see how it goes when the semester goes on. Okay, so the plan for today is we're going to continue with our lecture notes on bone biomechanics, and so we started very briefly. I think maybe like the first last 15 minutes last lecture. And so my plan is to continue on with that today. Hopefully, we're going to finish this set of lecture notes today, so that Thursday we can start talking about muscles, which I think are a lot more interesting than bones. Not that bones aren't interesting; bones are super interesting, but muscles are more relevant to kind of what we're doing in this class. Okay. Other announcements. I did post the first homework, so the homework 1 is up on Canvas, and so I believe the due date will be next Thursday. Okay. So this homework is a little bit different than a lot of homeworks I usually do, because for the first few weeks of this class, we're mostly going to be covering it's basically we're basically doing a biology class right now, and so there aren't any calculations or problems to do. They're all just conceptual questions. Okay? And so you can go ahead and answer those conceptual questions on the homework. And as for submitting homework, so you have a couple options. And so if you want to turn the homework in on the lecture days, and so I always have the homework to do on a lecture date. So if you want to turn it in the lecture, you have the option to do so. The other possibility is that you can turn your homework assignment into a PDF and then turn it in on Canvas. Right? And so most people like to do the Canvas option, because I set the due time to be at 11:59 p.m. on the day that is due. And so this homework's not due till 11:59 p.m. next Thursday. And so most people just submit it then as well. And I think that's kind of nice too, just so that you still have a copy of the homework with you. And so you don't turn it in and just kind of wait for me to grade it to turn it back to you. So, but either option is fine. And so if you prefer to turn it in person and for me to mark your homework with red, that's fine. But if you want to turn it in on the PDF online, then I'll give you feedback in the comments section on the homework page. Okay. All right, and so that's all my announcements. So are there any questions I can answer before we get started for today? Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. And so let's go ahead and pick up where we left off on bone biomechanics. And so in particular, we were talking about this idea of porosity in bones. And so bones are, from a material property standpoint, bones are very, very fascinating things to study, because if you cut open a bone, what you're going to see is not, just one solid material. You're actually going to see it almost kind of looks like a spongy type material, right? And so if you cut open a bone, let's say you have a long bone like this, right? Okay. And you cut it open, what you're going to see is not like a solid material, right? And so I think as engineers, especially, I think we have an intuition where we cut open a material. Say you cut open, a piece of metal, and what you see is just kind of a very solid, homogeneous block, right? So for bones, you don't really see that. And so for bones, you actually see, actually a lot of little tiny holes. Okay? And some areas of the bone have more holes than others, right? And so you might see, less holes over here. Okay? Right, but you basically see a lot of holes, and what you might think, especially if you're cutting open kind of a bone from an organism that is not living anymore, that these holes are air, so they almost look like air bubbles in the bone, but they're not air bubbles, they're actually filled with some fluid. But the important thing is that these holes are not calcium, right? And so they literally look like pores, and hence that's why we call, that's why we define this as porosity. Okay? And so, these are such a prevalent feature within bones. We actually grade, or we actually, characterize bones based on how porous they are. Okay. And so when you talk about the porosity of bones, you're talking about kind of the percentage of volume that are occupied by non-mineral tissue. Okay. Okay. And so if a particular bone or a particular region of bone has a high porosity, then those are going to have more of these bubbles that you see. Okay. And of course, as you can imagine, the more porous or less porous a bone is, it's going to affect its material properties. Okay. And so, there are two, of course, these, this exists on a range. And so it's hard to put, categories on these, but we can kind of roughly categorize them into two different categories and kind of talk about their general properties. Okay? And so let's talk about bones that are low porosity. Okay. And so low porosity is roughly characterized as about 5 to 30% of the volume being occupied by non-mineral tissue. Okay? Okay. And so it's a relatively small percentage. And so, for these types of bones or these regions of bones, 95 to 70% of its volume will be comprised of, calcium, which is a very, very hard material, as we talked about last time. Okay. And so these bones that have low porosity, they tend to be much stronger and much stiffer. Okay. And so because of that, these bones with low porosity can withstand a very high amount of compressive loading. Okay. And so kind of the biological term that we give for bones that have low porosity is we call those cortical bones. Now let's talk about bones with high porosity. So high porosity is roughly characterized as bones that are 30 to 90% of its volume occupied by non-mineral tissue. Okay. And so because they have so many pores, if you look at them, they really kind of look like a sponge. And so a sponge is actually a great analogy because they actually behave, not exactly like a sponge, but they share a lot of the same properties as sponges. Okay. And so in contrast to cortical bones, of course, these are going to be a lot less strong and a lot less stiff, but they're a lot more flexible. Okay. And so they're not as strong. But they have a better ability to deform and strain before they actually fracture. Okay. And that actually is really useful for, for certain parts of the body. Okay. And so the scientific name that we give to these high porosity bones is called trabecular bone. Okay. All right, so that's kind of a rough kind of breakdown of how porosity affects the properties of the bones. Okay. All right, any questions on this?
I have a question in Zoom chat.
Sure.
Can a person have both low porosity and high porosity bones? Like, are they like, do you have cortical bones in like certain parts of your body and then trabecular bones in other parts? Or is
absolutely. Yeah, actually, and everyone has a mix of both. And actually, the next example I was going to show you is that even within the same bone, you'll have certain regions that are cortical bone and certain regions that are trabecular bone. And they both serve very important purposes. And so, we can even just look at the, kind of the bone that everyone thinks of, which is a long bone. Right? Rough shape of a long bone. Okay. And so what you'll notice it for a lot of bones is that, the ends of the bones are kind of wider and thicker than the middles, right? And if you actually cut open a cross section of the bone, what you'll notice is that, there are kind of pockets here, which are very high porosity, right? And so, we can kind of indicate that with kind of like a mesh type thing. Okay. Okay. And so the ends of bones, they tend to be a lot more porous than the middles. And the reason for this is that, this bone is going to be interacting with another bone off to the side, right? And so you can imagine there's another bone kind of over here, right? Kind of a bad drawing, but you can kind of imagine, okay? And so the ends of the bones are really important because, as you kind of go about your day, as you kind of, go through your motions and act, stuff like that, your bones are going to make contact with each other at the end. Okay? Okay. That's just kind of a natural thing of having bones interact. Okay? And of course, your bones, oftentimes, you don't have bone and bone making contact, except in very unique place in your body. A lot of times you have things like soft tissue, like in your knee, you have a tissue pad called a meniscus that kind of protects this and kind of acts as a pad, right? But if you can imagine, having two hard things kind of bump into each other a lot throughout the day, it's going to cause, it's naturally going to cause a lot of wear and tear and a lot of damage to the bones, right? And so the way the bones kind of account for this is that they fill the ends of the bones with trabecular, so that as the ends of the bones kind of come in contact with other objects, this kind of more spongy area right here is able to absorb those contacts a lot better than maybe the low porosity bones, which are more brittle, right? And so in the ends of bones, which kind of have to be almost like a shock absorber, you can almost think of it like that, And that's kind of where you would see trabecular bone a lot more often. Okay? Whereas in the middle of the bones, the middle of the bone is kind of where the bone gets most of its strength, right? And so what you'll see more often is that in the middle of the bones, these are very low porosity. So this is kind of where the cortical bones are located. And so the middle, and so the kind of the shafts of the long bones are the ones that kind of give your bones most of the strength, and that's where it's low porosity. Okay. And of course, this is just an example here, but depending on where the bone is, what kind of loads it's experiencing throughout the day, it's going to have different ranges of porosity. But then it also varies person to person too. And so part of that is genetics, but part of that is also due to how much physical activity, the nature of the physical activity that you undergo as well. And so it's almost like your fingerprint. And so no two persons' bone structures are going to look exactly the same, just because everyone is so different. In terms of their genetics, but also in terms of just the activities that they do. And so the bone's going to have to remodel themselves to suit those needs. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this stuff right here? Yep. Oh. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And so fractures, and we'll go over fractures a bit later. Fractures are more kind of cracks and kind of the mineral surfaces itself. And so generally, if you have more pores in your body, or more pores in your bone, then it's harder for the bone to kind of repair itself, because the pores are kind of what excuse me. So the material, the mineral material, if there's cracks in it, if there's less pores, it's easier to kind of fill those in kind of with more bone stuff. So the more pores you have, there's kind of more gaps in the bone itself. But generally, the high porosity bones, they're less likely to fracture because they are kind of more spongy. Any other questions on this? Okay. Thanks. Okay, so now let's talk about a little bit more about the elastic properties of bones. Okay. And so first thing I want to say is that in contrast to, I think, a lot of the materials that we interact with as engineers, bone is a very, very complex material. And in particular, the way that we characterize the elastic properties of bone is that we say that it is an anisotropic material. Okay? And so the opposite of an anisotropic material is an isotropic material. Okay. And so what anisotropic means is that the strength of the material that you observe actually depends on the direction on which you load it. Okay. So another way to say that is that, the bone is going to be stronger in certain directions and certain ways of loading than compared to others. Okay. And so some examples of anisotropic materials that you might come across. I think one of the more famous ones is wood. Okay. Okay. So wood is a very famous anisotropic material. And the reason for that is, if you kind of look at a piece of wood, you'll probably notice there are grains that are running in the wood, right? And those grains kind of refer to the tree that it came from and which direction the kind of the fibers ran in the tree. If you load the piece of wood in the same direction as the fibers, the wood is going to be a lot stronger than if you try to load it in a direction opposite or perpendicular to the fibers. Okay? Okay. And so if we draw kind of a block of wood like this, right? Okay. And let's say that, we had fibers kind of running this way, right? If you loaded this piece of wood in this direction, right? So let's say that you took the block of wood and you loaded it in tension, it's going to be a lot stronger than if you try to shear the wood, this way, right? And so bone is very similar. So, depending on the direction that you load the bone, it's going to have different material properties. Okay? In particular, bones have been designed to be much stronger in compression rather than tension or shear. Okay. Okay. And so your bones can withstand those compressive forces really, really well. Okay. And the reason for this is that just by the nature of human movement and kind of the loads that we put on our skeleton, our bones are, they have to withstand compressive forces way more than tension or shear. Okay. Okay. And so think about, just the simple act of standing up, right? And so as you're standing up and you're sitting on Earth, the gravitational field is pushing you down towards the ground. But at the same time, in order to keep you from hurtling towards the core of the Earth, the ground is putting an opposite reaction force upwards, right? And so you have gravity pushing you downwards, you have the ground normal force pushing you upwards. And so both forces are kind of acting to compress your body, right? And so that compressive force that gets acted on by your spine, it gets acted on by your legs, right? A little bit by your torso as well. And so, even though you don't really feel it all the time, just because, you've kind of lived your whole life on Earth, your bones are kind of almost always in a state of constant compression, just kind of based on gravity and things like that. Okay. And so it makes sense that, we've kind of evolved in a certain way so that our bones are stronger in compression so that, we can withstand all of these forces. But the topic of fracture is actually interesting too. And so, knowing that your bones are weak or weaker in tension and shear, if you do certain activities that expose your bones to tensile forces or shearing forces, those are going to be the ones that are going to put you at much higher risk of fracture compared to, compressive forces or crushing forces, right? And so this is skipping ahead a little bit. And so, one of the most common ways that you get that a fracture occurs in your legs is if If you play soccer, you're probably familiar with the situation, but if you're in a situation where you plant your foot in the ground, but then your body kind of swings backwards, right? Then you kind of expose your leg bones to a lot of bending, right? And so bending, as you guys know, puts a lot of tensile forces onto your bones. And so that's why you see a lot of really, really gruesome fractures occur when a bone is kind of exposed to bending like that. Any questions on this? Okay, so let's talk about how bones grow and develop over time. And so just like, all the other parts of your body, as a person grows and develops, especially from when they're a little baby, all the way up into adults, right? The bones are going to grow with them, right? So your bones are very much an active tissue, okay? And so, we're going to talk about the mechanisms on which, through which bones actually grow. Okay? And eventually, as a person ages into, into their elderly years, into their retirement years, your bone strength actually starts to decay as well. Okay, and so we're going to talk about kind of both. And so it's interesting, kind of looking at the trajectory of bone strength over time. And so as you kind of grow and develop, of course, your bones are getting stronger because you're growing as a person, and then they kind of reach a peak at around kind of your young adult years. And then as you get older, your bone strength actually decreases and slowly decays over time. And that's kind of, at least with the current level of science that we have, is kind of an irreversible process. And so, very kind of fascinating to think about. Okay, let's talk about growth first. Okay, so, as a person ages from a small baby to a larger adult, right? One of the most prominent features is that they get bigger as a person, right? Their limbs get bigger, the torso gets bigger, everything about them gets bigger. Okay, and so when this happens, we say that the bones are growing in the longitudinal direction. Okay. Okay. And so the longitudinal direction, all that really means that your bones are going to get longer. Okay. And so when we're talking about longitudinal growth, most of this occurs kind of near the ends of the bones. Okay. And so there's a region of the bone called the epiphyseal plate. Okay. Where new bone cells are made and added to the end of the bone. So if we kind of draw kind of a typical long bone, this. So the epiphyseal plate is not quite at the end, but it's kind of near kind of where kind of the bone kind of bulges the most. Okay. And so that's typically where your bones are going to grow. Okay. So and the location of the epiphyseal plate changes slightly as the person ages, but it's kind of always kind of around that area, right? And so for most people around the ages of 18 to 25, the epiphyseal plate kind of tends to fade away. And so that's kind of the time when we associate a person stops growing, right? Okay. And that's the primary reason why we stop growing is because the epiphyseal plate. I mean, first of all, it's a lot less active, even if it hasn't completely disappeared by that time. It's a lot less active during those ages, and then eventually just kind of fades away. Okay. Right, so that's longitudinal growth, and so that's kind of how in a very brief nutshell, what happens when as we grow and develop. Okay, and so it's possible for bones to grow in other directions as well. Okay? And so another type of growth that we have observed is called circumferential growth. And so by circumferential growth, I mean the bones can, get wider. Okay. And the way that circumferential growth occurs is that kind of new layers of bone are kind of added to the outside of the bone. So almost imagine like a tree kind of growing in age, right? So as a tree kind of ages and gets bigger, kind of a new layer. Well, the new layer for the tree forms on the inside, but it still grows from the outside. But the same thing kind of happens for bones. Okay? And so this growth right here has less to do with the person growing, developing, but more kind of as a response to the loads and stresses that occur on the bone. Okay. Okay. You see it most rapidly occurring, during adolescence. So as the person kind of grows in length a lot, just because naturally, as a person grows and gets bigger and longer, then the person also gets heavier, and so that's going to place more loads on the bones. And so a lot of times the bones need to become thicker in order to compensate for these loadings. Okay. But this can also occur at other parts of a person's life as well. But the most rapid time that you see this is during ages 0 to 18 to 25. But usually, by the time you reach an adult, your body itself stops growing. And so your bones kind of also stop growing as well. All right, any questions on this? Okay. All right, so let's talk about how bones change as a person ages. Okay, and so kind of once you get past that early adulthood phase and you start to get into your more golden years, your bones will start to get weaker. Okay, and so there are multiple processes that are occurring at this time. Right? And so the one process that occurs is that the bones themselves will become a lot more brittle. Okay. Okay. And the reason they become a lot more brittle is because they lose a lot of the collagen in the structure. Okay. And so if you recall from last Thursday, one of the material constituents in bones is collagen, which kind of makes it more, more flexible, more pliable. Okay. And so as the body starts to lose collagen, and your bones aren't the only place where you lose collagen. You lose it in your hair, you lose it in your skin as well, right? And so there's a lot of changes in the body that are associated with that. And so as your bones lose collagen, then they become just naturally more brittle. Okay. Okay. And another thing that happens as a person ages is that it becomes a lot harder for your body to add more mineral material to your bones. And so the calcium that you intake as you get older, it doesn't really reach your bones nearly as much as it did from before. Okay. Okay. Okay, and so both of these kind of phenomena combined kind of lead to the observation that for older people, they tend to lose bone density and bone weight over time. Okay. Okay. And so for some people, the declines can be they can lose up to 1% to all the way up to 6.5% of their bone mass per year. And so, it's a big deal for some people. Okay. So if you see an old person kind of struggling to kind of walk around and they say everything hurts, it's not their fault. Their bones are literally weaker than they were a year ago. Yeah.
How would taking vitamins like calcium or collagen help this would be able to
Yeah, no, definitely. So you definitely see a lot of those types of products out there. And so, there's nothing out there that can reverse this process. At least no one's discovered anything. But taking things like calcium supplements, collagen supplements, they can definitely help slow this process down and to give you kind of an improved quality of life as you get older. Right? Like I know my mom in particular, they're in the form of chocolates, and so she has chocolates that have calcium in it. and they help kind of offset these effects, and they help, push off osteoporosis, which, we're going to talk about soon as well. Yeah. Wait a second. Some of them. All right. Any other questions on this? Okay. All right. So let's talk about another phenomenon of bones, and let's talk about their response to stress. Okay. And so we've just finished talking about how bones change over time and kind of those effects. But there's a lot of things that you can do, before you kind of reach this point to make sure that your bones are healthy over time. Okay. Okay. Right. And so in addition to, just kind of normal growth and development, your bones are actually quite dynamic parts of your bodies. And so they can actually respond to certain stimuli or certain actions. Okay. Okay. And what's interesting is that, of course, if you expose your bones to certain forces, then they're going to respond in a certain way. But actually taking forces away, or the absence of forces, will also cause the bones to adapt as well. And that's something kind of important to think about. Okay. And the way that bones react to this, and when I say react, what I mean is that they change their size, they change their shape, or they change their density. Okay. 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 All right. And so, to kind of start this conversation, let's kind of remind ourselves how an elastic material responds to stress. Okay. And so when you have an elastic material and you expose it to external forces, what's going to happen is that there's going to be some internal stresses that form within that material, right? And so very simply, if you take let's take a beam, right? And so we have a beam here. Okay. And so let's say that we take this beam and we pull on it, okay? And so we pull the beam in tension. If you slice open this beam right here, right? And then we kind of draw our force diagram here. Okay. What you're going to see is that in this cross section, we're going to have some internal forces, internal stresses, right? And the main reason those internal stresses form is that, you know, each part of this beam has to maintain basically, you know, equilibrium, right? And so in this case, this beam is static, right? And so every part of this beam has to be in static equilibrium. And so, you know, that's why these internal stresses form, is to kind of help maintain that, right? So bones are the same way. And so when you load a bone, right, even if you load it from the outside, right? And so I think for, you know, most of us, you know, we can't, you know, directly touch any of our bones, but just by standing up or just by performing actions, you know, we are putting stresses on the bones, and those stresses are felt, you know, throughout the entire member of the bone. Okay. And so it may not seem like it, you know, just because, you know, we're standing up, but, you know, inside your bones, there are these stresses that are always kind of occurring. Okay. And so when I talk about the bones responding to stress, you know, these are the stresses that I'm talking about, right? And so they're inside your bones, you have all these bone cells that can grow and adapt and react, right? And so once those cells experience these stresses on the inside, then they can, you know, they can kind of act and react accordingly. Okay. And so this process through which, you know, a living cell inside your bone, and this occurs at other parts of your body too. So it occurs in your blood vessels as well. And so whenever a living cell senses some kind of mechanical stimuli or some kind of physical stress and reacts to it, we call that process remodeling. In particular for bones, the way that remodeling works is that the bones, the like older and more damaged bone cells will get absorbed into the bone, and newer and stronger bone cells will be made to, you know, take its place. Yeah.
I mean, you probably missed out. Resorption?
Yes, resort. Oh yeah, that should be a, yeah. A no T. There you go. Thanks for catching that. Yeah, question?
So supposing the bodies and environment, there's no forces in space, how are you modeling that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, you know, so if you are in an environment where you're putting like no stresses on your bones, you know, kind of this process of your bone kind of resorbing old bone cells, that's kind of always occurring. But in order for your bone to actually create new bone, the bone kind of has to sense a need for that. And that need is through mechanical stresses. And so if you're in an environment where you're not putting any loads on the bones at all, you know, you actually start to lose bone mass and bone density very, very rapidly. So it's actually a big issue. And so if you ever, you know, maybe you guys might get the chance to, but you know, if you do ever get a chance to go to space, you know, and are in that kind of space environment, low gravity environment for a long period of time, what you'll see is that when you come back to Earth, you know, you're actually going to be probably lighter than you were when you left because your bones got weaker. And so you're in space, you're not exposed to gravity. And so your bones are like, you know, we're chilling, you know, we don't need to do anything. And so, you know, it's going to get rid of all those old bone cells, and then it's not really going to replenish its stores.
Have we done a study out there saying how fast or how fast that's happening?
Yep.
Oh,
Oh yeah. And I think for every astronaut that goes up to space, like International Space Station, that's something that they're kind of closely monitoring. But on average, I do have this stat here. I think they lose about, they lose about 1 to 3% of bone mass each month that they're in space. And so you're talking about, you know, for like an old, you know, for really old people, you know, they're losing about 1% of bone mass per year. You know, for astronauts that are, you know, typically young, healthy people, they can lose up to 3% of bone mass per month that they're in space. So it can be a very, very rapid process. How long does it take them to recover? Sometimes they don't. And so that's why, you know, it's very hard for, especially for once you reach adulthood, to add bone mass again, because that reabsorption process is kind of always occurring. So to kind of outpace that, unless you're like a teenager or something, that's really hard to do. And so
how do they compensate for that? They just like snort calcium pills or
no, so I mean, you know, no matter how much calcium you take, you know, you can't really, you know, reverse that process or outpace that process. And so they just have to kind of change the way that they live. And so they either have to, you know, get assisted devices so that, you know, so that they don't break their knees whenever they stand up or stuff, or they just have to be careful of what activities that they do. But yeah, it's something that, you know, is still under intense research, and something that, you know, hopefully that we're going to improve over time. Because I think, you know, if you kind of read the news or anything, you know, it seems kind of like we're headed towards, you know, an age where, you know, a lot more people are going to go to space. And so if that's going to be the case, we need to fix this problem. Otherwise, you know, everyone's going to grow up with, you know, glass for bones very, very quickly. Yeah. You don't really shrink, but then you lose mostly density. So your bones stay the same size, but they just become less dense than before. Yep. Yeah, no, that's definitely one of the areas of research that people are looking into. And so the idea is that, you know, you would inject, you know, cells like stem cells that can help stimulate the growth. And so you kind of almost trick the body into, you know, putting these cells in there to say, you know, we need to produce more and more of these bone cells, because, you know, for a normal adult, you know, once they kind of reach a certain age, the bone cells kind of lose the ability to add mineral very quickly. But if you can kind of stimulate that by adding some new cells in there, then you can kind of, you know, reverse that process. But that's still very much, I think, still in the research stage at this point. Yeah. Yeah, great questions, guys. Yeah, it's fascinating, and you know, and it goes even you know, I think it's fun to talk about astronauts in space, but you know, I think a lot of us are not going to experience that. But for even for people like us, you know, there's a lot that we can take from this as well, right? And so the main upside to this is that, you know, you need, you know, putting your bones through, you know, some level of stress and some level of physical strain is actually necessary, you know, in order for proper bone growth. And so you get a lot of it, you know, just by being a human on Earth where there's gravity, right? And so that's a big part of, you know, the process of kind of helping maintain bone growth, right? And so making sure that you're at least getting up from bed every day, walking around, you know, that helps a lot. But of course, another way to increase the amount of stress that your bones undergo, in a healthy manner is through exercise. Right? And so as we all know, exercise is, putting your body through motions that are more extraneous than kind of your day-to-day activities, right? So whether it be running, whether it be sports, whether it be, working out at the gym, lifting weights, any kind of activity that puts you at an activity level that's higher than just, standing and walking around, that's considered exercise. And of course, I think we all know a lot of the health benefits of exercise. First of all, it helps, keep you at a healthy weight and things like that. But the other thing that I think a lot of people don't really realize is that, by exercising, you put your bones through through higher levels of stress. And by putting your bones through higher levels of stress, it helps stimulate growth and it helps stimulate, this remodeling process in the bones, which helps keep your bones healthier for longer. Okay.
So if you exercise at a younger age, instead of your growth, is that this or?
It is. So there's still debates on that. The camp that I'm in right now is that it's mostly a myth because, you can still, I think what people say is that, you lift, I think it's mostly in response to weightlifting. So if you weightlift at a younger age, you kind of put too much stress on your bones and you kind of compress them and it kind of, it kind of prevents their growth. But, just kind of based on what we know about remodeling in terms of, how the bones actually respond to that, that stress is actually good because then that actually stimulates the bones to actually react more and produce more cells. And so, I'm very much in that camp, but there's other people in the other. So it's still kind of an open question right now. But but I will say what we do know is that this behavior of bone remodeling is definitely most active in youth. And so when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, right? So this bone remodeling is most active then. And we do have data that shows that people that were active a lot more in their youth have generally healthier bones as they age. So they're less prone to things like osteoporosis. Their bones tend to generally be more stronger in their old age and things like that. But whether or not it stunts your growth, I think it's still kind of an open question. So of course, the kind of exercise that you do is important as well. And so, if you are doing kind of relatively low intensity exercises like swimming or jogging, that's not going to be as effective at stimulating your bones as some high intensity stuff like maybe heavy weightlifting or high intensity sports, right? But I don't want everyone to go out here and start powerlifting weights to just to get healthy bones. And so if you can do any kind of exercise, any exercise is way better than no exercise. But there are certain exercises that are a little bit better. But going out and jogging for a mile is way better than just watching Netflix for 30 minutes. And so I don't want to give you the impression that you have to do you have to do heavy lifting, heavy weightlifting, or you have to play basketball, you have to play soccer in order to get healthy bones. That's not the case. And so, whatever you're most comfortable, just like with any exercise, whatever exercise you feel most comfortable with, that you feel like that you can maintain over a long period of time, that's going to have a much more positive impact on your health, overall, rather than just, weightlifting for twice and then saying that you hate it and then you never coming back to it, right? All right, question from the chat from Zoom.
Yeah, I had a question. It's not so much mechanicals, it's more bio, but I was just curious if you know why it is that when you keep doing physical activity into your elder ages, that your brain is much more plastic than it would be if you hadn't done any physical activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can only speculate because I definitely don't really know much about neuroscience at all. But what I would speculate is that, by exercising and because a lot of your entire body is controlled by, activity in your brain. And so what I would speculate is that, by regularly exercising, you're kind of, stimulating parts of your brain that normally would not be stimulated, otherwise. And so by kind of, exercising that and, and doing other stuff as well, where like, I know for older people, it's good to kind of stimulate their brains with like, simple crossword puzzles and things like that, it kind of helps keep the brain healthy because, a general rule of thumb in your body is that if you're not really using it, then your body just kind of tends to cast it aside. So, the more that you kind of stimulate your mind, your body, other parts of your, everything, then, it kind of tells your body that, hey, I still need this. So I need to keep maintaining it for as long as possible. Any other questions on this? Okay. All right. Okay. And so, I know we kind of talked about it already in terms of the astronauts, but we can go ahead and put a term to it. And so when you start to lose bone mass, when you start to lose bone density, that is called bone atrophy. Okay, so bone atrophy, occurs most often for individuals with a largely sedentary lifestyle. So if you just, play video games all day, then, you're more likely to have bone atrophy. For hospital patients that are bedridden, in addition to whatever health issues that cause them to be bedridden, the fact that they aren't standing up and walking around, bone atrophy is going to be another concern for them as well. Okay. This also occurs also for senior citizens, just because they're much harder to walk around in, and astronauts, as we talked about as well. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's talk about one specific instance of bone mass that occurs for a lot of people, and that's osteoporosis. Okay. So if you ever watch any kind of daytime television, then you've probably seen some commercials that advertise fixes for osteoporosis. It's funny, I heard a lot of these medical terms, growing up. I had no idea what they meant, but what I would always do when I was little was my grandpa would watch The Price is Right, the old school ones with like Bob Barker and stuff like that. And I just watched it with them just because I spend time a lot with my grandma and grandpa. And when it's commercials on The Price is Right, there's always commercials for osteoporosis and things like that. So I've always heard all these terms growing up, but it wasn't until I got to college that I really kind of understood what they meant. I just thought, they sell this in the commercial breaks on The Price is Right. Okay. Okay, and so osteoporosis is kind of a kind of another way to talk about bone atrophy because it's so common in a lot of the elderly population in the world. That's why we call it osteoporosis. Okay? And so osteoporosis is a disorder It's a disorder involving decreased bone mass and strength that often results in one or more fractures. And osteoporosis can get so bad for some individuals that, even just doing daily activities can cause, them a lot of pain and even fracture, right? All right, and so in terms of who experiences osteoporosis, it's definitely most common among the elderly population, but there's also kind of a difference in split in terms of sex as well, right? And so this tends to happen a lot more for women, but generally we've kind of taken a dip because of COVID, but generally speaking, the life expectancy for the human population has been going up over time, and so with the life expectancy going up, more and more people are experiencing osteoporosis. So the statistic, it's probably different now. I think this statistic is a little bit old, but from the textbook that I was using to generate these notes, about 50% of women experience osteoporosis. And about 33% of men. And that number could be even higher. And so, usually, there's no test that you can use you can do for osteoporosis. I think for the really extreme cases, you can see it in an X-ray. But the way most people discover that they have osteoporosis is that they come to the hospital with a fracture, right? And so, for older people that, maybe they fell down or maybe they were doing something and they break a bone, they go to the hospital, they get treated for the broken bone, and they realize they have osteoporosis. And so, it's possible that there's a lot of other people living with osteoporosis. It's just that, they were fortunate enough not to break a bone. Okay, so these numbers might be even higher. Okay. And so, the reasons for osteoporosis and, preventing it is still very much a hot topic of research. But I think one thing that's been very intensely researched is why is it a lot more common in women? Okay. And so there's a lot of theories out there, but I think the prevailing theory right now is that, generally speaking, during the time of your life when you're kind of adding bone mass as rapidly as possible, during your adolescent years, men typically tend to have a higher peak of bone strength compared to women. And whether that's genetics or whether that's, differences in the activity levels of young men, young women, I think is still part of the debate. But, as we talked about, before, once you kind of reach adulthood, it's really hard for your bone strength to actually increase. So kind of you reach kind of your peak of bone strength in adolescence, kind of, when you're 18, 20, 21 years old. And then just over time, it's just kind of a slow decline of your bone strength. And so, what typically happens is that, if we draw a graph of this, right? And so on the x-axis, we have time. Oops. On the y-axis here, we have bone strength. Okay. And so for men, it typically goes up like this. So, you might reach, you might go up, go up, go up, go up. And once you kind of reach your, young adulthood, then, you kind of steadily start to go down like that. For women, we have a very similar curve, but their peak is a little bit different. And so, you kind of go up, go up, go up like this, but their peak might only be somewhere right here, but they might decay at the same rate. Okay. And so because the peak tends to be smaller in women, once you kind of reach these years right here, that difference that you see right here, that's usually enough to cause more fractures and more osteoporosis. All right. And, like I kind of mentioned before, that osteoporosis it's a very difficult disease to diagnose because there's no really reliable test out for it right now. Not only is it that the telltale sign most times a fracture, but it's also not an acute disease, right? And so an acute disease would be something like COVID, right? And so if you have COVID, you get COVID and you almost immediately experience symptoms, and then you recover from that, right? Okay. And so the thing with osteoporosis is that, it's not something that you kind of catch in a short period of time. It's something that kind of develops over your life, over basically the entirety of your life. Okay. And so, if you do get osteoporosis in old age, it's not something that just happened when you got old. It's really the result of kind of a lifetime of habits and, and your physical activity over your entire life. Okay. Okay. And so today, what you're doing today, even as a young adult, that's going to have an effect on whether or not you develop osteoporosis when you're older. Okay. And so the best way to prevent osteoporosis, just like they always tell you about, your health, is to just get regular exercise, right? Make sure you're eating right, making sure that, you get a healthy amount of calcium in your diet, that you're putting stress on your bones, right? And so kind of the more physical activity, the more healthy of a lifestyle that you have now, it's going to pay dividends, down the road. Okay. And so I have a lot of friends that are doctors that, and some of them, work with elderly people, and so, what they tell me is that, for those older people, it's not so much that, medicine has kind of advanced to a certain degree now where, people can live longer and longer with the help of medicine. But if you live a healthier lifestyle, it doesn't really extend your life as much, but it does dramatically improve the quality of your life when you get older. And so if you can imagine, if you're in your 70s, 80s, and you don't have to deal with osteoporosis, you can still probably move around, you can still go about your daily business. But if you have osteoporosis and all those things are painful, that's much more difficult to live. And that's kind of what they observe. All right, any final questions on this? Yeah.
Does the word porosity, I was wondering, osteoporosis, I was wondering if it increased the porosity.
Oh, so that's kind of how That's kind of how it's observed. So yes, and so if you have osteoporosis, your bones tend to be a lot more porous than other people's. Yeah, and that's why they lose a lot of strength. But they're not flexible anymore because a lot of the collagen is kind of left, and so you have more pores, but it's more brittle at the same time, and so that's why they tend to fracture a lot more. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. And so when we pick this up on Thursday, we'll finish up the bone lecture notes, which I just have to talk about fractures. And then we'll start talking about muscles. So thank you guys for coming today. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Probably like Tuesday, Thursday. Yeah. We're running from like all the like, oh shit, this is what
I have no idea. So probably, I think the only one probably I'll choose is 442. So that's kind of my class, but we've taken that one already. Besides that, usually they give me like a 500 level class. I just taught 501. I won't know until Thanksgiving. So I've taught 541. I teach 540. I think you were 540 as well. I also sometimes teach 520, which is like the advanced class. But last time they gave that class to someone else. I was already teaching. And I think that was just recently offered. So I don't know if that's going to be offered. I don't know. It might be a new class. Okay. 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 I had a good Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good one to take too. So did a lot of theory. Yeah.
Are we able to type our answers to the homework?
Oh yeah.
Can we just submit it?
Of course.
Video?
Yeah.
All right.
Kelvin, any final questions before I wrap it up? All right.